Hello, everyone. I am Peter Maravellis, your host, and we are delighted to be in conjunction with the Poetry Center at San Francisco State, presenting this tribute to the life and work of Tyrone Williams, the legacy and life of a man who really has been considered by many to be what you would call, I think safely, a poet's poet. Tyrone Williams was a brilliant thinker, writer, and activist, a mentor to many, and a dear friend to many, many more. And he left us too suddenly and too soon. He passed away last March, shortly after his 70th birthday. And although based in the Midwest, Tyrone Williams played a notable role in Bay Area literature. He was publishing with publishers like Compline, Hook Press, Krupskaya, and Omnidon Press. His influence was felt by many in the literary community and beyond. He was the epitome of how to live one's life with purpose, with faith, with dignity, and generosity. From a first-generation college student at Wayne State University to a storied 40 years as professor at Xavier University to the David Gray Chair of Poetry and Letters at the University of Buffalo at SUNY, Tyrone Williams made an indelible mark, and he will be missed by many of us. So we celebrate his life and legacy with this gathering of poets, friends, and community. Tonight's event is going to be arranged in 3 parts. The first part will be a set of readings where the authors will read alphabetically by their last name. We're going to run from A to G. And then the second part is going to be a musical interlude with Alden Nielsen, who we're very delighted to have with us tonight. And then the final part of the evening will be authors reading from H to Z. And I ask each of you to simply read the name off of the next person who's going to be reading after you. Also, I want to mention that City Lights is carrying a full selection of Tyrone's books. If you're not familiar with his work, please do check them out. They're over at the front desk. And I also want to point out that Tyrone's archive is housed at the Poetry Collection at the University of Buffalo. And there are many really amazing items available through the digital materials section, which is available online. So I encourage you all to please check that out. It's a wonderful, wonderful resource. And then one more thing before we begin. Tyrone's estate set up the Tyrone Williams Fund to support Cincinnati Youth Poet Laureate Program. So there's more info about that. We've left flyers under your chair, so please do check that out. And then we ask that each of you reading tonight, I mentioned that, announce the name of the reader after you. We're not going to be doing bios because there's so many people reading tonight. There's, for the sake of brevity, just to give it. The bios are going to be online on the City Lights website. So for those of you watching, and of course for those of you here, you can always check out the listing and you get a full rundown. So we're going to begin now with a word from one of the key organizers of today's event, the poet Erica Lewis, to begin the proceedings.
Thank you all for coming. Tyrone was everything and then some. And I'm so happy that we could celebrate him this evening. Thank you, City Lights, for hosting this event to honor him. I want to read a little bit about the first time we met and the last time I saw him. We met at my house over pot roast. I ran a monthly salon in my home where I would cook a big family-style meal for each event. Tyrone came to town and read as the special guest. We didn't really know each other, even though he taught at Xavier University in Cincinnati, and Cincinnati was my hometown. We'd only emailed a few times about his visit. Even though Tyrone was in my house, I was scared to talk to him. He seemed almost bigger than life to me. He was a poet, and I was in awe of him. I fixed Tyrone a plate, my mother's pot roast recipe with all the fixings, potatoes, carrots, peas, those cute little pearl onions, gravy. After dinner and the reading, white wine in my glass, red in his, we sat down and talked and laughed about everything: poetry, People, Ohio. He told me how much he enjoyed himself that evening and that I had really put my foot in that pot roast. That familiar black colloquialism, the way he said it. We knew each other. He felt like family. Our friendship deepened over the years, and I called him Dad for many years, and he called me Kid. Our last adventure happened after my mother died. After spending 6 months in Cincinnati, burying my mother and handling her affairs, it was finally time to go back home to San Francisco. Tyrone agreed to take me to the airport. For some reason, we decided to use GPS to map our way, even though we both knew the way to the airport like the back of our hands. Due to traffic or some other roadway nonsense, our directions rerouted us to back roads and byways we had never traveled. We were by the river and then in a deserted-looking town with dirt roads and 4-way stop signs on every block. We thought for sure someone had to be filming us because it was all so surreal and absurdly cinematic. We were on the lookout for Boss Hogg and General Lee and trick speed traps. I thought of the scene with Whoopi Goldberg in the early 80s film Jumpin' Jack Flash, where she was trapped in a telephone booth being dragged by a tow truck through the city. As we drove along in his Subaru, I said, "We're just a couple of little black people trapped in a big silver box driving through Kentucky." To which he responded by singing the banjo song from Deliverance. We cracked up and kept driving, doubting whether we would ever make it to the airport in time for my flight. In a way, it didn't matter. We were having a good time. During all the antics, I got a text that my mother's house sold. Who did that happen to? We laughed at that too, because it felt like the universe or my mother or God was kicking me out of Cincinnati, cutting me loose with the ultimate, keep going forward and don't turn back. We made it to the airport. Little did I know that our road trip hijinks would be the last time I would ever see him. What I know now that I didn't know then is that Tyrone was everyone's special friend. He just simply made everyone feel so special. It was always an adventure when we got together. We were always laughing or crying. And that is how I will always remember. Taylor Brady can't join us this evening, and Susan Boots will be reading for Norma Cole.
All right. Norma says, the poem I'm going to read is called Burn the Book of Life. The poem is in the library section of As Is. I can imagine Ty saying, I was thinking about the Middle East. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Burn the Book of Life. Still, I follow in burning these books the model of leading masters who are to be emulated, whose guidance is embraced and whose fire is sought by the dim-sighted. Abu Hayyan al-Tawhidi. Rumored wildfires, a Christian mob, a harbor of burning ships. The book to Claymore books moved, spread to forests after immolating tree lines. Alexandria, Antioch, Ashurbanipal. Ticknor and Smithson notwithstanding, the librarian has never been able to bend his patron to his purpose, and thus adult education is poorly served by this public font of voracious omniscience which deems to irrigate the surrounding wastelands of human ignorance, but hoards its nectar while drenching the plain, waters rising to flood proportions, and Noah a cloud above no land or water. Burn the book of life, and the cuneiforms solidify in the purifying fires of papyri, leather, wax. Burn the book of life, and the last 3 books of a Sibyl must be purchased at great cost, a complete collection. Burn the book of life, and the northern wall of the incinerated Persepolis fortification archive collapses onto spared clay tablets in caving of the sleepers long before Ephesus. Burn the book of life, and the trial of the Talmud ends in conviction as the scroll burns and but the letters fly up in the air. Burn the book of life, and Abdul Qadir Haidara transfers manuscripts from the Ahmed Batat Institute of Higher Learning and Islamic Research to locations unknown, a metaphor alluding the fleeing literalists of Ansar Deen. Burn the book of life, and the kneeling drink from a Tigris black with ink.
So, next up is Michael Cross. Maybe not. Sorry. Right.
Hi, everyone. So I published, myself and Neil Alger published a press called Hook Press for years, a little chapbook press, and we published this book called Pink Tie. I printed a bunch of copies, and I hope you all take a couple. And if you feel, I will not accept money, but if you feel at all bad, please donate something to the youth poets for Tyrone. And thanks to Pat Clifford. Is Pat here tonight? No, didn't make it. But Pat's the executor and gave permission for this little reprint. So please take it. And it's a lovely book that I read a couple times a year, still to this day. It's about a friend of his named Peter Ross. It's about a lot of things, masculinity and music criticism and life, and the idea behind Hook Press was to kind of contact poets as much as we could and realize that a lot of poets have something that's not poetry on their C drive somewhere, and to kind of ask them to look at that and I think it's still a good idea, damn it. And you're welcome to steal it. But and poets are delighted, I find, too, to even be talking about their non-poetry work. But to have something like this come back from Tyrone was, it was one of the great events of my life, to be honest. It was just so, you ask people for stuff when you're a publisher, and you're kind of obligated to publish it. And when it comes back and it means so much to you, it's miraculous. And the other, I just thought I'd just briefly read this, which, though I was still am working on a novel, probably will be until I die, and the characters are in a writing retreat, and I asked a number of writers, Tyrone among them, I'm like, okay, well, there's these poets, and they are going to, in the book, describe what their project is about. And so I asked people to I thought, well, I'll just steal it from my friends. So I asked some poets, to describe their project, kind of summarize it, and they gave me permission to use it, in the book. And so this is what Tyrone sent back, and it seems appropriate here. It's pretty heady, but I'll try to read it, slow it down so I can absorb that incredible intelligence that he had. So here's his, I guess, summary of maybe the what he was working on at the time, or I wasn't never clear if it was, trying to summarize everything, but you'll get it. I believe we are hailed, called forth by the blank spaces between letters, between words, between poems, and even between books. These lacunae constitute, as a system and structure, the black hole that is lack. There is indeed nothing outside the text, and one need only emphasize that nothing to grasp the semantic and syntactic, ethical and political, psychological and social power of this assertion, to see how nothing has stood in for, as one example, other, as that which must be expelled to a horizon and clung to at the very moment it threatens to disappear over that horizon, in order to formulate I, we, community, nation, etc. I miss him very much. Steve Dixon.
Little thing I jotted up this morning, this afternoon. Answer song for Tyrone Williams. I've been trying to put something together that has to do with answering, responding, talking with, and what happens between us when we do that. 5 years ago, I was happy to invite Tyrone to deliver the annual George Oppen Memorial Lecture for the Poetry Center at San Francisco State. Michael Cross had suggested Tyrone for the Oppen Lecture years before. Thank you, Michael. And it took me years to follow through. Of course, he accepted the invitation, and Tyrone's brilliant talk took place at the Unitarian Church on Franklin and Geary. Some of you were there. This was December 6, 2019, a Friday night, cold, damp, typical of that room in winter. The following night, Saturday, December 7th, Tyrone read his poetry at Woolsey Heights on an evening with Melissa Mack and me, reading our own work. I've been writing steadily a long series of poems begun in May 2019 that eventually continued into May 2020. That year between two Mays would include, besides Tyrone's visit, my mother dying in September 2019 on the 22nd, my travel several times alternately by train and by plane back and forth between San Francisco and my mom and dad's place in northern Minnesota, the onset of the COVID pandemic in March 2020, and shifts in everyone's life. Outside the frame of that year, my father would die from COVID before the vaccines were available on November 24, 2020, what would be 4 years this Sunday. I'm sorry if this part is about me, but that night at Woolsey, I read a poem that I dedicated to Tyrone that I titled Answer Song. At Tyrone's talk the night before the Woolsey reading, he opened with that term, which he said he first heard before junior high school, when the Temptations answered Mary Wells' song, My Guy, with My Girl, in 1964 and 1965. Tyrone had started out as a songwriter. I found this memo today in a draft of an abandoned poem I'd totally forgotten about from that same month, in a file dated December 20, 2019. I was talking with Tyrone, who almost once had a career writing songs for the Floaters. True. The answer song thematic carried through Tyrone's query of Oppen's work, among other poets' work. Here's what I wrote about that in a letter of reference. Tyrone asked me 3 Novembers ago to write when he was invited by Myung-Mi Kim to apply for the David Gray Chair in Poetics at SUNY Buffalo. Okay, this is from that letter of reference. The opening sentence to Tyrone Williams' 2019 talk on George Hoppen is this. Long before I had heard the academic phrase call and response, I knew about its popular, inexact equivalent, the answer song. And this is me again. To my mind, several things have immediately and already started happening here. The familiar term call and response, we're let know, isn't sourced in slave songs or gospel hymns. It's rather and more accurately an academic phrase, a descriptor after the fact of song practice. The answer song, by contrast, is a popular form, an inexact match for the ethnomusicological call and response, and one that, for our author, arrives before poetry, before scholarship. And it's by way of this familiarity that can be brought forward now into our study of this work of George Hoppen that doesn't linger at all in the realm of popular song, but can be recognized and queried through one of its devices. It's a move, this opening sentence, that disarms high and low distinctions while naming them and rearranges common presumptive positionings between music, poetry, and academic discourse. As they all in fact exist, with this one sentence, we're entangled in all of them. In the poem I read at Woolsey, I made reference to a very recent repeat performance that had happened 2 times at the Temescal, first at the Temescal Arts Center in Oakland on Saturday, October 5, and second the next day at a day-long festival in the War Memorial Opera House in San Francisco. Local musicians were enacting a 50th anniversary celebratory revival in honor of the Art Ensemble of Chicago's signal work, People in Sorrow. I had invited singer-composer Faye Victor from New York to perform for the Poetry Center, together with pianist Myra Melford, which they did on October 3rd, also twice, in the afternoon at the Poetry Center and the evening at the Center for New Music. Faye Victor sang both performances with the orchestra, presenting the Art Ensemble's People in Sorrow. Somewhere between October then and the night at Woolsey following Tyrone's lecture, the poem I wrote came together. Somehow in the 24 hours between Tyrone's lecture and the Woolsey reading, it landed on that configuration as the answer song. Well, we'll hear. I'm finding 2 versions of this poem, and I'm going to read the latter one because it's possibly better. Here then, in the somewhat later and conceivably better answer to the answer song that I read for Tyrone that Saturday night at Woolsey Heights, revised version, June 20, 2022. Answer song. Every city dead set versus the people, right? St. Francis, his holy namesake city, said it, not in bird talk, in post-ecclesiastic Latin. Steel versus you equal wartime. Gold versus you equal peace. That is the city seal of San Francisco is steel in wartime, gold in peace, written out in Latin, and circle around the seal. Whatever city hasn't got its own, with relish, step one baby step forward in the lineup, where they put that lump of person in blanket bag, seeming asleep, graced by low fog, after midnight stalled wheelchair accompanist. Many more came than the numbers, whole families roughly aware how they were entering into some pact in the act of it happening, with them present as whoever's present to it. You don't miss a beat, do you? Clumsy, after-thinking thought, after Ms. Sylvia Winter, her locution nailing to the letter Homo economicus. What makes you think you can come carry this, her transliteration, into the room? Quote, the institutionalized enactment of liberal monohumanism's man too as Homo economicus. End quote. Versus People in Sorrow, 1969. Second chance, 2 days to catch reprise, 50 years after the fact. Those gentlemen seeded the repertory to be taken up at half-century intervals as answer song for Tyrone Williams, before and after song. And Kevin Dublin is next.
I feel like I'm in I was about to say something, I'm like, that's not true. In a unique position of like, of missing out because I've never met Tyrone. And what's interesting is, it was kind of one of those moments when I was like, oh, whoa, like how do I not remember this or remember that? Because it was like there were no less than 7 people when he passed who were like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And Eric includes the coach. And I was like, why do I know that name? I don't remember that name. And I go and I'm like an archivist. I have like I keep a lot of things I probably shouldn't. And I use archivist purposefully because I'm not just like hoarding useless papers and scanning pointless papers. And I just searched in, I can't remember if it was Dropbox or Google Drive or on my other hard drive. I searched his name. Several things came up, like 4 things specifically with his name. And I was like, oh. And I see a note that I had written down that was like, Tyrone Williams is the truth. And it's like 2 or 3 other sentences. Look at green notebook with this on it. And I was like, okay, all right, okay, I need to find that notebook. I see number 2 in my, again, I have books in a bunch of places, like not just in my house. I have some families keeping the books, I have some friends keeping some books. I have a spreadsheet of books in different places, and I'm like, oh. Pops up on spec, pops up on the spreadsheet at my sister's house. I'm like, oh, okay. Oh, wait, I remember. Summer. Duke. I was putting together lesson plans for a class on like, it was called Outer Poetry. And the idea was, poetry just beyond, like with the physical world, beyond limits of form, all kinds of things. And so I had, that was another way I had some notes, and I had in the third place this poem, actually, that's by Ted Jones, but I had a link to a video that I ended up going through and watching. It was a link where I think it was for some like modern poetry, like YouTube thing, and he read the poem and he was talking about the poem. So I want to share 2 things. Just one, that poem, Ted Jones, The Truth, and beyond that, and then a poem, which was the 4th thing that popped up, because I had this for teaching. So, the truth. If you should see a man walking down a crowded street, talking aloud to himself, don't run. Don't run in the opposite direction, but run toward him, for he is a poet. You have nothing to fear from the poet but the truth. And if a black man is not yet survived by Tyrone Williams, and can't, take it to the hole in one. Runner on, held close. If not on the run, right up the middle. Ahead for daylight, against the grain of in and outfield shifts. 3-point field goals, all net, no post. Tag up for home on the back 9. Stretch. Many plantations, nosebleed lost. Once the marches reach back, pull up, leg out, a leg up on, ground made up for the flat nose, not prefixed by a, not a prefix for or out, just a flat nose or flat note with legs. And just connecting to that survival, survival. So here's the Tyrone, and next up, Tongo. I was like, let's see Tongo as a Martin. Oh, no, he's an idiot. Okay, so Tommy Foster.
Wow, thank you for the mic adjustment. I have a special relationship to mics. Apparently, I don't like them. It's something to be here, and a couple of things that I want to start with. I don't cry in public. So before I came, I was teaching a class, and I was explaining to my students why we had to end class 5 minutes early. And I began to cry, and the tears actually shocked me. And they shocked me, one, because I don't cry in public, and class is a public space, but two, I think because I had not sort of grappled with or taken in or taken up my sense that although I didn't know Tyrone, I knew of Tyrone always, right? And I knew him, I had met him. I had spent time with him in different places. And that there's a way that his, for me, was a familiar presence in these kind of communities of poets and poetry. And so I'd always like, well, what's Tyrone doing? And so there are three things that I've chosen to read. Two poems of Tyrone's. And these two poems, because something about them gets at, for me, the kind of wit, the sly humor. And one thing, I guess the unexpected sassiness in one poem. So those two poems. And then the other is a letter written by a writer who was with him at the end. And this is being strained, isn't it? So I'll start with the poems. And these are from stilettos in a rifle range. And this is Random Late Night Calls. Oh, the awkward equations of errands, attachments. Oh, voluptuous multiple ovals alone. Virally exact, a virtual face-to-face, cloaks the fiber optic kiss and tell. I open to the coo of who dis? Dear stranger, how are you this evening? Yes, the chickens wobble or plummet coopward. Yes, I know only we can read the bones. See, she ripples the veil of never was. Off screen, the chorus giggles itself to shush. She prattles on about, I want to do that, and especially that to her. If one of her girlfriends can babysit, if I can get to the 24/7 drugstore, if we can hit a Denny's later, soon, in which key is the whisper? We drone like radios tuned to the bottom of the dial. The margin is just another toolbox. Take that last line. It's brilliant. And then this is the poem, very brief poem. I didn't know he had this. H-bomb. Her fuck me hills will have been heard. Hers will have should a deep throat triangulated by the hands of a clockety stop, a pretty watched tick-tocked off the fuck you effect of doppelganger busters. That is the H-bomb. And so this is the letter. I hope the author will forgive me. This was the message. I was able to fly out to be with Ty from Thursday to Friday upon learning of Ty's situation from A and J on Wednesday. The extent of Ty's dire medical condition wasn't immediately apparent to anyone initially. He had suffered a car accident when going to pick up L, who had already been picked up. It seems he had had a stroke, crashed, abandoned his car on the highway en route to the airport, and a saintly Uber driver picked him up as he was dazed, but not badly injured. At first, doctors thought he was to be released from the hospital until tests revealed cancer and it spread to his brain. Excuse me if the facts are blurred. My main focus was, of course, to be present with Ty and not worry about the extenuating situation, which is obvious once tests revealed the extent of his cancer. It was the most miraculous, gorgeous 24 hours of love and outpouring with Tyrone. He received me in full consciousness, was very appreciative that I came. It was great timing. Just Jay, his pastor, and the chair were in and out visiting him. We talked quietly. He is very attentive, but the morphine is, of course, sleep-inducing. Even so, when resting, he is absorbing the love, the connection, the presence. I would talk a bit with him, noticing when he needed rest. He is so calm, full of grace, acceptance, wit. His humor is intact. We imagine cocktail hour with John Coltrane and Jimi Hendrix. We talked about Cloud 9 or Cloud 8 if Cloud 9 was too oppressive. We outright laughed, belly laughs occasionally. I told him I loved him redundantly, and he loved it and was so open with his emotions. I gave him a few kisses for safe travels. He looked so gorgeous with a white beard developing, a little grin on his face. There's been an outpouring of love, many calls, flowers, cards. Whomever is in the room facilitates the call. Ty can't hold the phone. His reflexes don't permit. A communal feeling has permeated the space. Jay has been a steady flame of compassion throughout. I felt such appreciation for her care in this situation. It was so profound to sit by his bedside, hold his hand, gently stroke his face, wash his face with a warm washcloth, which he very much enjoyed. We shared deep recognitions of such a steadfast friendship over the decades. He is indeed holy, resolved, going with the flow. I didn't know how devoted he is. He is a regular church member of an abolitionist Methodist denomination. His pastor, Kay, is a rock-steady individual. I sang He's On Down the Road from The Wiz for him, badly. I think unless you have a voice, you can only sing it badly. But he talked about meeting the owl, which could be the god or gods. I think Lynn brought up the owl. She knew more about the owl. A big relief is that my dear friend, R, and her partner, A, will foster to adopt Ty's dog, Huey. Huey was shaking like a leaf without Ty, but as soon as we picked him up and brought him to RNA's place, he rebounded. A special moment was getting through the hurdles to bring Huey to see Ty. Huey sat on Ty's lap like a cat. Ty was relieved that his dear dog found a home. So much sobbing, love sharing, intimacy, and grace. There are details and micro details, and then the deep tissue realization of the fact that our friend, the great poet and person, Tyrone Williams, is dying. My heart is crushed. Sorry, this note is a bit haphazard. It is hard to type through tears, and I sent so many text messages, I don't even know what I'm writing. Sending all of you love. One last thought. It occurred to me, and it's funny, this also occurred to me. I was telling my students that poets are a petty lot. And scholar poets, extra petty lot. And so one of the kind of remarkable things about Tyrone was that you didn't hear anybody talking shit about him. And I don't know of him talking shit about anybody. But of course there are people who are closer to him who may have heard him talking shit about people. But I was in the circle that didn't hear that. So it occurred to me that Ty only inspired kindness and attention, never antagonism. I've never heard him say utter nasty gossip or cast aspersions, no petty nonsense. And it has served him because I am here to share with you my observations. He is holy. This is not hyperbole. He is so assured, graceful, open, and ready to reach the infinite cosmos, to show us the way to die and keep living. This is true sophistication, maturity, wisdom, and beauty. May the spirits grant him the most beautiful, pain-free release. His third eye was massaged. He is going to exit through it. He said to me twice that he had a great life. And this beautiful tribute was written by Brenda Ijima. And, glad to walk the space with him. And the next, it's such a weird thing, right? And the next, Susan DeVert.
That was beautiful, Tom. And thanks City Lights and Erica Lewis and Jean Hooving for putting this together. I'm among the many recipients of Tyrone's generosity. I knew him in what turned out to be the last 2 years of his life. After hearing his fantastic open lecture here in SF in 2020, I wrote to him to ask permission to refer to it, echo its first sentence in a poem. His sentence is, and I echo Steve as I read it, his sentence is, long before I had heard of the academic phrase, call and response, I knew about its popular, inexact equivalent, the answer song. I asked Tyrone for permission to use a version of this sentence in a poem. My line and the one before and after from my book Burns are rhythmicity, as Maria and Nicholas Torok call it, call and response, or the answer song, as Tyrone Williams calls it. Buzz pollinators striking middle C, or sonication, so I've heard. Then we exchanged more emails, a conversation, call and response, but not academic. And then we spent a wonderful day together, gossiping, eating, agreeing, and not, curious, telling stories of family, work, full of surprise, affinity, while roaming around the dog patch area of San Francisco. A day more brightly lit than others when you look back and when you're in it. Tyrone embodied the answer song in his way of living and writing. In his often talk, he also says, quote, songwriters were, I was convinced, talking to one another, which is why I became more interested in the history of American popular music songwriters than in singers and bands. Replace songwriters with poets, or think of poets as songwriters, and I didn't know he was actually maybe a songwriter, or could have been. And pair interest with action. Tyrone's many actions of talking to one another, being in touch, the many reviews, blurbs, essays, lectures, teaching, all kinds of engagement with a precise care of listening and articulation that kept a call and response volley going among poets and between Tyrone and so many. One of the rare things in his way of listening is that he was immune to hierarchies of the famous and heavily awarded. He heard without those filters. Later in the Often Talk, he says, I pointed out that the answer song can respond to both past and future songs. In other words, it can anticipate a future production, which it will have already answered. In converting the song, it responds to a past or future ask. The answer song straddles the present, not as a stable or fixed present, but as a precarious, unstable solution, always about to dissolve back into the past or congeal into the future. I miss talking with him and the friendship that was just starting. I think of him now in his words as straddling the present, not as stable or fixed presence, but as a precarious, unstable solution. I hear him as the answer song without the answer, but also full of response, always about to dissolve into the past or congeal into the future. His words from CC. Happy fault. Who was it? Was it for me, you, or some misnomer, wrongly called remember, comma, something like that? Who could tell? Tongue torn out, favoring a hand? Who will forth something left over, remarks of a body of work, disparaged, acclaimed? Who recalled what once dubbed all the difference, figure ground no more so than when both appear as one? Who beckons from a fetal, misshapen, de-legged future I? Who will have arrived, save for its limp glitch and catch, belated offline, staggered or tapping, off stage, outside the flawed wings? Who called Christians Negroes black as Cain, but Cain, nothing but Cain, with impunity? Who else will call, and when, and if? No one, never. Who calls back? Next is Cecil Gibson.
Thank you. Thank all of you who've read and spoken before me. The things that you've made me think about. One of which is Ohio. Ohio people are here, and myself very much among them. And I'm remembering not the last time I saw Tyrone, but a time very simple. We were at the Louisville conference, and I was on my way to, this is many years ago, I was on my way to see my mother-in-law in Cincinnati, Ohio. And he walked me across the conference and all the interlocking buildings, which was kind of confusing, to his car, and then drove me to the airport so I could rent a car to drive from Louisville to Cincinnati. Why do I remember that? It's very profoundly vivid of being in his, just the two of us, in his company. I don't remember what we talked about, but it's a very, very strong memory of presence. I recently read a review that Tyrone wrote of 2 books by Ronaldo Wilson, a writer known to many of us here tonight. The review was published in Ohio again, the Cleveland Journal, called Full Stop. Tyrone was writing about the books, one about Ronaldo's books, one across the genre prose book of literary observations, body reports, and accounts of absence, and the other a group of paintings and photographs and masks. Tyrone said on the page, "This gulf and abyss cleaves each work. It divides and rends each as the impossibility of genre." Or in my companionable reading of that review of Ronaldo's work, I find difficult writing may aspire less to the evasion of form than to the never-ending inquiry into what, or better, how form does. How form does. And I would add that Tyrone's review of Ronaldo's book, 2 volumes, was as inquisitive and seeking as the 2 pieces under review. Forgive me if I stretch, but I'm thinking about his interest, expressed once again in the Oppen lecture, about the answer song, and I encountered his piece on Ronaldo's work as an answer song to those songs of Ronaldo's. He spoke in the Oppen lecture of the answer song being a precarious, unstable solution, always about to dissolve back into the past or congeal into the future, both different from and no different than the past or future, hence its precarious state. I'll stretch again and note the precarities I find going back through the books to Howl and its cellular RNA poem. Here I find all over again its sassy flirtation with the old helix and the old helix's single-stranded regions and the sound of words. And I find the various associative sounds of the G word, of the G's and their vowels so compelling. I'll read just a snippet from that. Accursed Georgix underwrite, agape, agape, geographical chimes, arrow going akin, Aegis, guinea gall. Answer songs. And earlier he kit-bashed, in that same book, he kit-bashed Emily Dickinson and Wallace Stevens. He wrote, 0 at the. Tyrone gave a lot. From the Oppen lecture on the physics of reading and writing, he said, I had to find a middle way, and it was poetry that provided the means of the mean, striking a fluctuating balance between understanding and creativity. These 2 facets of poetry were, I was convinced, speaking and responding to one another every time I read a poem. I'll stop there, except to say that I need to say that I've been the beneficiary in both poetry and other ways of Tyrone's caring and generosity. I say this knowing that I'm not the only person in this room who can say that.
And now we have Alden Nielsen. Gene Hooving was going to be next, but Eleni Stachopoulos is going to be reading on her behalf. Or actually, yeah.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, Jane could not be here today, so she asked me to read what she has written for Tyrone. I thought to initiate a celebration of Tyrone Williams in San Francisco because of Tyrone's presence in San Francisco, and I wanted to mourn his passing with writers I knew and who knew him. I was soon joined by Erica Lewis, who has done most of the work on this event, so thank you, Erica. Virtually nothing would have kept me from this community testimony except for illness in my own family. I first met Tyrone in San Francisco at a reading in a crowded room more than 20 years ago. Tyrone Williams was an explorer who sought encounters with the monumental and everyday world in its social and political dimensions, encounters with sayings of the famous, the infamous, and the unknown, encounters with literature, art, and poetry, revered and marginalized, encounters with language itself, its semantics, orality, and visuality, encounters with people in multiple walks of life and of diverse affiliations. There was no subject too large or too small for Tyrone. Take, for instance, the title of his early book, The Hero Project of the Century, or his recent As Is, as described by Tyrone, a multi-pronged investigation into the relationship between the West and East, the entangled networks among Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and the dynamics among Islamic practices and pre-Islamic cultures. It is, in this sense, a meditation on the vacillation between betweenness and amongness, the two and the many, and the desire to escape both two-ness and manyness into the singularity of one on the way to extinction, the bone at zero. As for how small he could go, how about in Howell, how to live between the attic ceiling and the house roof, how to live between the crawl and the crawl space. Tyrone held his deepest happiness and anger inward, and he lent these to his exacting actions and writing. In his poem Mayhem that begins his hero project, Tyrone writes, "God, I wish you were white," a white woman sighs, exasperated. Tiger, tiger, burning, Willie Horton strikes out, Willie Horton. Tyrone was called Ty by his friends, and Blake's tiger, spelled with a T-Y, must have called out to him. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? Tyrone's fearful symmetry was different than Blake's, a refusal of stabilized oppositions. His symmetry was that the tiger is the lamb, and the lamb is the tiger. In his poem on Miles Davis, How Like an Angel, he explores the how of Miles' creation, befitting Tyrone's own poetics. Play what isn't there then, and still learning how to listen around corners for. Tyrone takes apart the very nomination of king. Is it not like the king? Play what isn't there then. It not king is like the play above that. Like the king, it is not the exact pitch of a hinge. I remember being with Tyrone when he would hit on something that caused him to react. This might be some inconsistency in an idea or something he had just witnessed. He would get a glint in his eye and sometimes a short laugh and launch forth. I miss this Tyrone greatly. Ty, Ty, burning bright in the forests of the night.
And so, Andrew Jordan.
Hi, so glad to be here at this event honoring Tyrone Williams. Thank you, City Lights, for hosting. I also want to acknowledge that this is an event that's sponsored by the San Francisco State University Poetry Center. We lost our illustrious director, Steve Dickerson, this summer, but those of us remaining on the faculty, Tanya Foster and myself, are committed to keeping it going in some form, and this event is evidence of that. The Poetry Center is going to keep going. So I've heard Tyrone described as a poet's poet. The poem I'm about to read is probably one reason why. It's called Mortal Facts from his book On Spec. And you really need to encounter this poem on the page, but I'll do my best to render it vocally. Mortal Facts. As to a works recited, the coached voice, the canonization of perfect pitch, augurs itself. A wizened singularity, a cruise ground. Asterisk. Here's the asterisk. To be cast out of the spell, a skyline obscured by broods, the state hones to roost, a spelling bee champions, another form of address falls through a real door in a false floor. End of footnote. Offspring of a mixed marriage, labor passes back and forth. I am so. Ends toward you, institute, for example, music, capital, not unfor, not you, a you in me, a you before me in the mirror of mores, but a field chart, stripes and bars. I spin a major motion, CH, clip or trailer by order of Roger, copy, H2O, flowcharts blur the cut, hashtag, no blood, not at first, skin defending nothing, or too stunned to give, though give it must. Back to the poem. Surprose, or mere surprise, or imperfect mimicry, a beam of light bent by a beam of wood. For toward, read belief system versus BS. Alternatively, E equals MC square, except around or in, states in flux, which thus are not umbrellas recalled, related. Okay, Mortal Facts. Next reader is Alden Nielsen.
Thank you. I can't tell you how good it is to be back here after my decades of wandering in the wilderness of central Pennsylvania. Tyrone and I were close friends of many decades. And this time last year, we first read together in a bar in Brooklyn, and then just a few days later, we convened with Evie Shockley and Billy Joe Harris at Kelly Writer's house for the 200th Poem Talk. You can find that online. And then just a few days after that, we'd driven up to Niagara Falls, where we were both speaking on panels at the Northeastern LA. He was supposed to be with us in Louisville. Susan was mentioning the Louisville conference. He was going to join us on a panel discussing A.B. Spellman and his wonderful new book of selected poems. And that was the last time that we got to speak with him. Lori Shire and Norman Finkelstein got him on the phone out in the hallway, and Lori reported that his very last words to us was, "I love you." I can never call him Ty. I'm kind of like that. He was always Tyrone to me. Maybe because I was able to make jokes about a certain song. We traded answer songs all the time because we're both old. So we both knew Work With Me, Annie. It was answered by Annie had a baby. She can't work no more. And in the following decade, of course, everyone knows a boy named Sue, but some of you probably don't know the answer song, which was a girl named Johnny Cash. I'm just going to read two very short poems from this chapbook, Futures Elections, and it's still available from Dos Madres Press, so please do go get it. This first one's called Day in Heaven, Procrustean Sestina, October 16, 1995. After gratitude, sublime surprise, for who among us imagined himself in heaven? There was nothing else for us to do except convert the wonders into signs, unbroken like the law, like all the work we swore to do when we returned to earth. It was a day of absence from the earth, which so loved heaven it sent as signs its only misbegotten sons. No work or women would profane this day in heaven. Nothing there would come as no surprise. There were women. There was work to do. We stood and sobbed as only mothers do when none but Jesus hears. It didn't work. If he heard our cries, he gave no sign, unless his son, cliché, the unsurprise of uplift, was himself the gift of Mother Earth, Father Sky. Hell hath our heavenly. We had shed our human forms in heaven. We were gods who once had roamed the earth, or monkeys, or rabbits, or spiders, as if surprised by such. What men did not do. Shapeshifters flattened like sandwich signs. Largesse writ twice. Our pride, our shame, will work for good. We heard the calls for good faith signs, atone, but not the descent of surprise. There was work for us back on earth, though we knew that it was only work, not the faith we only found in heaven, where there was never anything to do. When it was finished, all except the work, we returned to earth, things to do, believe without faith, in hard work, in heaven. It was not a fall, just heaven on earth. A day too long, spoiling that surprise called the hereafter, the play of signs. Now, I think this is very much in the mood that we're all in this week, but October 16th, 1995 was in fact the day of the Million Men March. Much shorter. Heaven on earth. We are in the world, not of the world. Called out by one who sees, who doesn't. A one-eyed seer set aside, set apart, like us, in heaven, on earth. Hell made over so we might sit a spell. Wine, nay, water, standing in the well. I can't get over this sky. The next world never arrives alone. It drags along the world no longer here. Never this sky. I don't see Linda Norton. Oh, there's Linda back there. Sorry. Shouldn't have taken my glasses off. Next up is Linda Norton.
The last time I saw you, Alden, I had dark hair.
I had hair.
Thank you, Erica, for inviting me. I saw Erica in Cambridge, and I'm going to mention that trip where it convenes with this memory of Tyrone. I didn't know Tyrone as well as some of you knew him, but he was important to me, so thank you for including me. I guess the important thing is that when you don't have a lot of status and somebody like Tyrone shows you respect, you feel it. It matters. I knew Tyrone's work before I knew Tyrone, and I was happy to cite some of it in the slide presentation and talk I gave when I was on a Baraka panel with Tyrone himself. He was surprised to see his own face up on the screen. My photo of a library copy of the great picture of him on the cover of CC, and I think he was happy. Later, he invited me to be on a panel about appropriation and identity at the New Orleans Poetry Festival in 2021. Jane Hooving and Gabe Gooding were also on that panel, and I think we were all surprised by how well it went and how meaningful and fresh our collaboration was. And I strayed apart from poetry to talk about visual art, and Tyrone was really into that, and we had good conversations in email about that after. I can't find a video of this, but I've never forgotten Tyrone's answer to the question, some question about what is common in humanity, universal. And his answer was, the thing we have in common is that we each feel we don't belong. My third book, Cloud of Witnesses, is a kind of continuation of the conversation we had that day at the New Orleans Poetry Festival. I asked Tyrone to consider writing a blurb for the back cover. This was at Christmas 2022. He told me that he was reeling from loss in his life, which I guess those of you who are very close to him know all about, but would make time to do it in the new year. We talked about death and winter holidays in Buffalo, and he said he had plans to be with people he loved in Ohio over the holidays. He said he'd be happy to read the manuscript and write about it. Knowing, as we all do, that Tyrone is a brilliant critic and reader and not one to use superlatives, I was curious about what he'd see in the book. I was delighted when he quoted Du Bois, a contested figure, and said that the writers whose work I appropriated to write the poems in the book would wince at not as they welcomed me into their esteemed company. High praise. My daughter and I were in New England a few weeks ago when I was in residence at the T.S. Eliot House, thinking about the raw and the cooked in poetry. Tyrone, written by himself. Individual talent divides tradition into tides, tenths, and nationalized tribes. Catch as catch can, market share, erosion, staggered leaves. I thought of Tyrone again when we went to the Berkshires and stopped in Great Barrington, where Du Bois was born and later lived as an adult in exile before he left for Ghana and never returned. And again, at the end of the trip, on a visit to the Peabody Museum, where the exhibits are in flux because the curators now acknowledge the cultural sensitivities they've ignored for decades and decades until just recently. I thought of Tyrone. I think because I was a publisher and am now a collage artist, I always look at images and wonder how they work in and on books. A book by Tyrone, for example, might feature a cover image from Wendell White's exhibition and book Manifest 13 Colonies, which was on exhibition at the Peabody. It's quite beautiful. A reliquary of artifacts from the lock of Frederick Douglass's hair to James Baldwin's inkwell. Photographs so close up and vivid against black backgrounds that you can't really see at first what the things are. I could write him an email about it, send him a link, see what he thinks. Like you, I find it very hard to believe that Tyrone is gone. I think of technologies and their relationship to mourning. The train, for example, and the train whistle, and my friend Cecil, fellow trainiac. It seems to have something to do with the bardo, and it seems to harken back to the ancient world and some eternal longing, though it is relatively new. And the telephone is like that too, as you go on expecting someone who's dead to call any minute. Forms of communication bound in matter that seem supernatural. Our poetry and song at the place where the living and the dead meet and don't meet. I keep thinking, I better email Tyrone. I keep thinking, I better call Tyrone. I didn't know that Tyrone had possibly a life as a songwriter until early this morning. So that's part of our whole togetherness. The next is second. Is Kit Robinson here?
Thanks to Erica for inviting me to participate in this great event. It's been great listening to you all. Tyrone and I became friends when I called him out of the blue to congratulate him on an NCAA basketball tournament victory by his Xavier Musketeers. So we were at Brennan's. I think you were there, Cecil. I think he was surprised because we had never spoken before. Oh, was that the graduate? That's right. He was pleased to hear from me, and from that moment our friendship assumed an easy, congenial pace. Soon thereafter, he invited me to read at Xavier in Cincinnati, and a few years later, he reviewed my book Determination, published by Kyle Schlesinger's Cuneiform Press. It is hands down the best review I've ever received. In addition to being a marvelous poet, Tyrone was a tireless scholar and a perceptive critic. His book reviews testify to a rigorous analytic mind and a capacious generosity of spirit. For this event, I'll say a few words about Tyrone's 2018 book, As Is, from Rusty Morrison's Omnidon Press. The capital A and Z of the title As Is highlight the first and last letters of the Latin alphabet, a clue to the indexical method of the poetry's lyric and dialectic strands, where verbal improvisations play phonetic ping-pong with vernacular language. Fractured phrases split and regroup, spray multiple meanings willy-nilly, and exhibit the punning, reframing, and multivalent tendencies that lie latent in our common tongue. The poems thus perform in the arena of the present, momentarily alive, yet always slipping away.
Meanwhile, the work is laced with references to history, geography, philosophy, science, and art. Subtext buried deep in contemporary usage. So that while these works strut their performative chops in real-time vivacity, they also draw the reader back into the past and around the globe through a kind of archaeology of words. Thus, Tyrone writes history into his poem. His cryptic asides open frames of reference located across Black, feminist, and world historical studies. While reading as is, I tracked down a boatload of references to artists and writers, including post-colonial and transnational feminist theorist Chandra Talpe Mohanty, Lebanese artist, filmmaker, and author Jalal Tawfiq, Cincinnati poet and essayist Ariano Mukherjee, Detroit environmental artist, educator, and community leader Tyree Guyton, Tunisian calligrapher, painter, and sculptor El Said, as well as such fantastic historical figures as early 19th century French autodidact zoologist, botanist, geologist, and linguist Constantine Rafinesque, ancient Egyptian prince Hossein Akhet, and the fragrant concubine, a Muslim woman of far western China, the consort of the 18th century Qing dynasty emperor. In effect, what I realized was that for Tyrone, research and writing go hand in hand. And as he traces the long waves of colonialism, nationalism, and transmigration, Tyrone deploys flotsam and jetsam of history's currents into the arguments of his verse. His is a poetry of biting wit that plays fast and loose with American English, while skewering the perennial powers that lie behind our colonial so-called republic. For example, the poem entitled Charon on the Potomac is a savage takedown of the nation's capital as vainglorious symbol of slavery-based wealth. And I'll read just the last three stanzas of Charon on the Potomac. But now as I recall these spheres, domes, and temples, vain aspirants to a glory that once populated the sky, nay, heavens, the vain glories of this capital offend me, and more, the national, no, epochal reduction of me to a children's story cannot and will not go unpunished, however much I lack the authority to impose my substantial powers. At least that strange hunter I once saw standing on the veranda of his mansion, yet another bow to vanity, near the land these Americans named Mount Vernon, seemed to actually see me, for I recognized the sudden terror in his eyes. I smiled with pleasure as I sailed by with another shipment of red, white, and black savages. Would that his descendants were as humble as they stroll about dipping cups into the rivers of museums, archives, libraries, memorials. Had I the power, I'd bend that national harbor atrocity, Capitol Wheel, into a terrible train of gondolas, plunging down the rapids of an agitated Acheron into my waiting arms, a sneer widening into a maw. And our next reader is Arnold Kemp.
Thanks. I live in Chicago. I'm only visiting here for a little bit. I wasn't expecting to say anything this evening, but thank you, Erica, for asking me. You've all said so many very true and moving things about Tyrone. I can't recall exactly when we met, but I was first told about Tyrone by the poet Rob Halpern. And then I think that I went to see him read at David Buch's house in Oakland, maybe when we met. But the first book of his I started reading was CC, and I couldn't put it down. I read it over and over again. I still read it constantly. I've always been moved as much as by what the poems in CC say as what they don't say. in their succinctness and their respect for the shapes that they take on the page. Many of you know when someone said this evening that Tyrone is a poet's poet, but I'd also say he's a poet for visual artists. And he had a lot of love for visual art. He, at some point, was organizing readings at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit and asked me to come out. I think I was living in Virginia at that time, come out to Detroit to give a reading, and I read, and Barrett Watton was there, and Carla Harriman was there, and it was great to see them, other people I know from the Bay Area, and to see Tyrone and spend time with Tyrone. And then years later, when I moved to Chicago, I was asked to give a reading at a small art space, and they said, well, who would you want to read with? And I said, oh, Tyrone Williams. And Tyrone just got in his car and drove out and gave the reading and was prepared to drive back that night. And I said, it's late, you should get a hotel. And then I found out that Artist Space hadn't offered Tyrone a fee for reading. And I just said, I work for a school there, and I got my school to pay Tyrone. Because artists, poets, you need to get paid, right? So the thing I was saying about Tyrone being a poet for artists, I am very happy that Tyrone asked me to give images for 2 of his books. This is one, and also his book, Howl. The image on the cover is an old painting of mine that I think I made in 2005, and it's very meaningful. I've never known why exactly Tyrone asked me to give images of my work for the cover of his books, but I was always moved and very happy to give those images, and I think that he's chosen really important works. And I think you were saying you wanted to know what this was, or we can talk. So I wasn't prepared to read. I grabbed this book from the counter there. I flipped through a few pages, and I'm just going to read something, and I feel like because I didn't rehearse or anything, that this is what Tyrone wanted me to read to you. Little by little, for Malcolm. The subdivision of area codes follows. Housing evolves, as does cliché. So too, the human nature. Everything except the abstract, sedimentful ground, ennobles baboons. But what of these hypostasized lawns, this back called my mule, they, it, confounding locks, union-free Negroes plus cost-effective labor equal abbreviated angels, formerly former. Hence the conundrum coined blur, dilemmas exchanged for rakes for enigmas, hope, acres squeezed into a steeple, despair. The fixed rate of interest appreciates. Gated ghettos know from know-how. Went west, boys to boys with a Z. Mature castrati as reading is too. I said that I discovered Tyrone's work in the early 2000s or late 90s, and at that time I was reading C.C. a lot, and I was in graduate school, and I was trying to think really deeply about blackness, and blackness as a color, blackness as a racial designation, and even blackness as a kind of magic. And thinking about Tyrone's work and its effect on me gave me the courage to explore that in my work. I have a series of like black and pink paintings. One's called Cant, one's called Descant, and one's called Recant. And you would know those are poems from CC. I can't say anything more. I'm very thankful that we knew Tyrone. I think his effect on arts and letters is profound. Thank you.
Stephen Rood is up next.
Thank you very much for Erica for this and City Lights. Thank you so much. Imagine that I'm Rusty Morrison, not myself. I'm here really on behalf of Rusty. Rusty and I were going to read together in tandem, but Rusty was run over by a car, broke her leg. Her leg was broken, and she had an operation, and she's recuperating. So it's tough, but I'm here to really to channel her, and also to give my love to Ty. It's beautiful to me hearing everyone read here and make Ty's art come clearer to me and to us. It's really a joy to hear his mind and that extraordinary mind as it plays itself out on the page, and the music of his language, his crazy line breaks. It's really lovely to hear. I just want to say something because I knew Ty. Just the quality of affection in that man. He was sweet. Whatever anger there was and all of that, the sweetness in him is what I carried. And his modesty. For a great poet and for a true, a large figure, Ty was not inflated. He was just as sweet as you can make him. So that's my feeling about Ty. Rusty writes, I want to say that I was so impressed by and so grateful to and so honored to have been a friend and colleague of Tyrone Williams. Omnidon was delighted to publish some of his books and to have him as our board chair. Steve, this is Rusty's little script for me. Say something about your love of Ty here. Well, I've said that. Rusty, Steve and I will read a few poems from Ty's incredibly prescient, powerfully provocative, ground-shattering book, As Is, published by Omnidon in 2018. We will read them in tandem, collaboratively. Imagine that we're reading them. These poems engage with sonics and meanings in ways that are uniquely Tyrone's. As he collages past and present, defies expectations about what could come next after a line break, and slurs cultural norms. It is electrifying to follow this speaker as he deranges language while riffing across cultures and philosophies. I feel my thinking transformed as his derangements open me to appreciate errant couplings both on his page and in the world around him. That's Rusty, who loves him and published him.
And Jocelyn Seidenberg.
Hi. Thanks, Erica, for inviting me. Thank you, Peter, Sealights, and Poetry Project, Francisco State. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I'm going to read some poems from this book. I'm holding it up because of the cover that seems to have also meant a lot to a lot of people. so I became familiar with Tyrone's work because he sent it as a submission to Krupskaya in our open reading period in 2001. And we read alphabetically. So after reading 100 or so submissions, I got to Tyrone's, and my fucking mind was like, my head exploded. And Kevin and I were like, who is this person? We'd never heard of him. And I was like, well, I'm just going to call him on the phone, like landline phone call. And so I called him, and I was like, hey, I'm trying to reach Tyrone Williams. And he was like super, like, kind of cagey with me. And I was like, my name's Jocelyn, and I'm calling on behalf of Krupskaya because we want to publish your book. And he like burst out laughing. And he was like, oh, I thought you were like a bill collector. Anyway, as he was to many of you here, all of you here, he's a very important person to me, and so I'm going to read from this book, CC. Oh, and I just wanted to say about the cover. Our tradition in the collective was that we asked the writers to send us images as suggestions, and then at that time we were working with this like very brilliant designer named Frank Mueller. And then Frank would do his magic with the images that people sent in. And so Tyrone sent this picture in of himself, but Frank manipulated it to make it seem as if someone were carrying it in their back pocket, and he folded in fours, and also the sort of old-time feeling of it as well. I thought it was just this brilliant treatment of the image that he sent us for his cover. I'm shaking, so forgive me. I'm going to read from the section, Who Is It? I'm not proud to be black. 1. Hope ends and sinking breaks out. Uncertain violence, which is not despair, or, if despair, sublime despair. Disfigured hope. The table, already broken, gets cleared. Double consciousness gets swept aside by polyentendres, duck rabbits, waveapoles. Neither waving nor drowning, we tread water like a page turning in a book. We trace the arc of Icarus. The sky only seems to fall, and then only sideways, like a page turning in a book. And in the larger arc of Daedalus, hope settles in another country, ending thought. We neither wave nor drown. We turn to the page. We begin outside the book, but the text is everywhere we turn. A finishing fable, cowboys in the boat of Ra, who marvel at this curious thing. Hearsay circulates as he said, she said, to the put down dubbed as he said, new commandments overdubbed the old ones. Skin grows back over old bones, disfigured hope. The table already broken, dysfunctional, is finally institutionalized as a work of art. Or the black sheep sold down the Jordan or the Nile, another country cobbled out of continents, extant or not, February, Juneteenth, Kwanzaa. 3. I wipe the spit from my face and read on. We want more than this attenuation, singularity, launch windows so narrow, so fleeting, so hard to reach in time. We need more than just a book called How. But the text is everywhere we turn. Blue and his shopping cart of blueprints, true blood in stitches, a howler or a howl. A face come spit is not mollified by inverted commas. An index of distance shaped like a promise and a threat, a covenant, a contract on our lives. The principle flies like a flag, or spit returned with interest, or we throw our hands in the air like we just don't care. Nobodies and nations, the false dilemma. We are neither, however, concentrated as teamings, trends, or tendencies, bunched up at, impaled upon, opposing horns like shrunken heads or tails, the excluded middle as dispossession makes possession joy, reconstruction, acreage, and mule, happy days and endings, zero sums, the median strip. Begin here to thumb rides or jack cars, the two-way traffic shaped like a promise or a threat, a covenant waits for light, not legs. It never strikes deals, only pedestrians foolish enough to venture forth, and yet, what choice but adventure? Thank you. And the next reader is Eleni.
Julian Spark.
Oh, sorry, is she here? That's
I think of Tyrone as a philologist in the radical sense, a scholar of language whose critical brilliance carries his love of language and therefore vast, intimate knowledge of it as pharmacon, its deployments, its powers, its limits. I miss Tyrone's mind, his warm encouragement that he gave to so many of us, his precision, his sharp eye and ear, his willingness to go against the grain, his synchronic diachronic, his ostraneni, his own eschaneutics. I remember an incredible reading he gave at UC Berkeley on a wild and windy night in 2012. I came away physically invigorated with his diction and his voice, a match for the wind. Recently, writing an essay on Phoebe Giannisi, a contemporary Greek poet-philologist who redefines tragedy through the nomad and the animal, I realized that the perfect person to consult on the histories and entanglements of ethnos and oikos, indices of both exclusion and belonging, was Tyrone. And I felt again the pang of loss that you all feel. Now, at this moment, mired in helpless witness of and complicity with genocide, on the road to Christianized fascism, I miss what he would say to us, what he would know how to say, and what he would write. I want to end with the provocation and pleasure of some of his critical writing, his magnificent writing. So these are a few excerpts from Outsider Ecopoetics, Notes on a Problem, from 2013. What would an ecopoetics be without, that is, outside human language? By language, I mean not only the formal qualities and dynamics of written and oral languages, but also the semiotics of Braille, sign language, hand gesture, eye contact, facial recognition, and the position of one body vis-a-vis another. Would such an ecopoetics even deserve this or any other name? Would such an ecopoetics no longer confined to a name, a book, a house, a world, or the earth be, by definition, inscrutable or hermetic, precisely to the extent it offered itself as the indefinite extrapolation of the structure of desire, or what comes down to the same thing, the exceeding of every structure of lack? This extrapolated structure of desire, or an excess irreducible to lack, would induce and depend on an asymmetrical relationship between expenditure and profit, between generous, if not substantial, investments in the future, and an ever-diminishing rate of returns. In other words, an ecopoetics worthy of its name would call itself into question indefinitely. If the ghost of the book inhabits outsider ecopoetics, It is because the problematic concept of the outsider artist vis-a-vis modern and postmodern aesthetics has served to not only historicize and thus validate the art world, but also the realm of politics, insofar as the political outsider stands in apposition, not opposition, to the well-connected insider. That the art world's rehabilitation of the, quote, outsider in the 20th century occurred more or less around the same time as politicians began running for office as outsiders to establish blocks of power is not coincidental. The political fallout from the Vietnam War and Watergate on the one hand, the sense of exhausted possibilities after abstract expressionism and pop art and their sundry spin-offs on the other, led to a renewed interest in anti-establishment figures in both the political and cultural spheres. In the most general sense, then, the outsider is a countercultural figure in every sphere of human activity. The outsider is, in all cases, the poison and remedy for whatever ails a particular institution, custom, or tradition. Absorbing the outsider, usually under the rubric of sacrifice, guarantees for a little longer the life of the institution, custom, or tradition in question. It goes without saying that in the literary sector of culture, the book is a formidable, if no longer hegemonic, site of recuperation. In this context, outsider ecopoetics must be understood as a necessary, if necessarily compromised, response to the perception of exhausted possibilities after environmentalism in general and nature poetry or poetics in particular. Nonetheless, that exhaustion, like the book, dogs ecopoetics as the remainder of a particular mode of anthropo and biocentrism. Of course, if one were to conceive of ecopoetics as including the book et al., the book complemented by what it is not, the book as an element within an intertextual ecosystem, one would gesture toward a more performative mode of reading or interpretation. But such a performance, while important as a differential relation to the process of engagement and interpretation, would be no more or less, quote, holistic than simply reading at a desk or dancing and reciting poetry in a field. In all cases, the senses and modes of cognition would be engaged, though, to be fair, to varying degrees. That variance is why there is epistemological value in, for example, somatic exercises and constraints, pulling one's hair, binding one arm behind one's back, sitting on the edge of a bed, walking in a park, etc., to jumpstart the creative process. Still, however much in ecopoetics that is, in fact, eco-dancing, or eco-theater, or eco-sculpture, uses of the body different from sitting, standing, pacing, or lying in bed, it cannot eradicate the finitude that is set in place the moment a non-linguistic experience is translated into language. This finitude, a condition of any language, is precisely what the book, like the folio or the scroll, mimics. Thus, to the extent we imagine the book as the exemplar of finitude, we mistake effects for causes. For the finitude of the book also mimics the finitude of the human body. And more, for the concept of finitude is, finally, inextricable not only from the book, but also from the body, by which I mean not only a human body, but also all other bodies, a body of water, a heavenly body, etc. The body, finite by definition, is also what the book mimics, and what is outside the book, attempts to exceed. This means a rethinking of the concept of the body, to say nothing of the book. For in the end, a resistance against the biocentrism of the body as such, against the anthropocentrism of the book as such, might offer glimpses into an ecopoetics no longer at the apogee of its orbit about a center. Imagine, if we can, an ecopoetics untethered from the earth, a body no longer bounded by the concept of a globe or sphere. Imagine a body adrift from embodiment, a book like love, unblurbed, like love, unblurbed, like love, unblurbed, like love, unblurbed.